So, in terms of when you want to define what is esoteric, you can just look at it as a very massive umbrella term, like kind of a dome over every kind of topic in any culture that would be deemed slightly lesser known, or even much lesser known, or for the advance, or for the initiate of a certain rite, or for the kind of sect that groups themselves and creates through a higher sense of knowledge sourced from something. Right? We'll get into that. But essentially, you have many different bodies of work, many different cultures, and many different rites that would amalgamate two different esoteric traditions. Ultimately, though, esoteric is just a term you can use for anything concealed or to the lesser known. Therefore, a stigma will be developed in order to create a need for dissuasion or a possibility of dissuasion for the mass, who would perhaps hear or just have a notion, they understand the tiny sliver of what it might mean, or maybe nothing at all, in a complete inversion, fabrication, just like false perception and false appearance. How would you describe it? Like essentially a false appearance and description of what an esoteric tradition might be. That might be the masses' main possibility for understanding that information. But ultimately, right, the esoteric differences between exo and esoteric would be that they wouldn't fully understand. They wouldn't fully understand because through the dissuasion methods, they would just be able to focus on what they deem and what they are filtered and programmed to consume as exoterically of value to them. But besides that coherence to them subjectively, there still is that difference in terms of what is actually being presented truthfully and more logically reasonable in terms of logic and how the rhetoric is actually formed. Once you look at esoteric concepts, you see how there's much more of a focus on practical or scientific or technical aspects as opposed to blind, intuitive, mystical feelings and thoughts. It will include that as well, but it will have a more substantial, a more true basis, a more substantial basis for what it has to present in terms of its content, right? And the laws laws and principles that it bases itself upon, right? Because if you want to look at in truth, distorted or divulged content from a earlier group of work that it assimilated, is the Hermetic text and the Hermetic principles that are based on universal laws but are comprised in a way that leaves out crucial details about where it originally came from in the Emerald records, because it came from the Emerald tablets of Thoth, and that's where the Hermetic principles came from. Those principles can be considered universal laws, such as mentality principle or correspondence, and how, as above, so below, and these esoteric concepts. Also, the Trinity and dualistic concepts that you see in literally every single religion. These all divulge from something, but essentially, once you look at the esoteric and the exoteric, you see how there's a paradigm, like parallel to each other, of the paradigms, because one is based in kind of a loose, superficial, mystic, kind of imbalanced way of reasoning for most exoteric religions, or most, even if we want to completely remove religions, let's just talk about in terms of history. You can also label different aspects of history as the esoteric herstory, if you want to switch it to herstory instead of history. But you can compare also something like science and history, and these broad topics all can fall under the broad dome that is anything slightly less known or less discussed, less talked about, or quite a bit less talked about, or as we said, initiate type of information. You can possibly think and question if these forms of teachings and concepts and scientific principles in tandem, like in a relationship with mystic or religious in a sense, or maybe spiritual, mainly based in awareness and love type of spiritual information that is realistic. That is why in the current day and age, if you look at different exoteric, even in new age, which would be an exoteric aspect to it, that has exoteric for sure, because they assimilate what could be even esoteric doctrines, even, but they assimilate it and they make it exoteric. Actually, everything came from the ESO. It came from the core. EXO is that distortion. So the new age has that distortion where the failure to bring up the truthful reality of negativity and the reality of how things are not how you might want it to be to your ego, because there is havoc, there is control, there is destruction, and there is mind control agendas at play daily in this consciousness prison energetic farm known as the planet we reside on. Also, not having any focus for negativity or being able to be confrontational about other people, lack of understanding of how attraction works and how manifestation is supposed to work, not in terms of service to self. You can look at refabrications or convolutions or purposeful eradication and completely disregard and completely brushing off different scriptures and books and texts and teachings, and kind of propagandizing or fitting it to a belief system. That is what is also at play, because it's just at play. It's literally mind games. These are the mind games in the mind conscious prison and this illusion farm. But guess what? Why does that have to be a bad thing for you to be alive? Because guess what? I'm literally mentioning the fact that evil exists completely, and it does. And it should not exist. And it should not exist. And it should not exist. And you gotta alchemize your way out of this shit and find a way to be service to the other people, though. Well, if you just got one of those, honestly, let's just break all the material. Like, you literally just that pure thought form where you're like, I know we're gonna have like a collective uplift of each other and we're service to each other, and you can kind of get a glimpse of that in certain everyday, like that feeling, that internal feeling where you know, okay, I appreciate this service I give to this person and their service are giving back, and we're literally in symbiosis with one another because we're interconnected into this, right? In this ultra complex simulated hologram, there's too much context to just base it solely off of positivity. You have to go, shall I just say, dive deep into the depth of what is your inner darkness, the outer darkness, the outer deception, the outer falsity, the outer sacrifice, the outer pain. And in whatever trauma, whatever roots, you gotta just stop to the roots, and perhaps that's when you can find some type of transcending transcending knowing, like a transcending sense of knowing that is beyond like words, beyond like any like religious or spiritual tablets that will tell you anything. Like it's just a knowing that's transcendent, that you just you amalgamate all that you've learned and all that you've felt throughout your experience, that you can have a higher thought form that just transcends words, right?